Good evening. The COVID inquiry began on the 28th of June 2022, believe it or not, 525 days ago, and about £100 million later. It's time to hear from Boris Johnson. But what have we learnt that we didn't know already, and what will we possibly learn from him? Joining me live is TalkTV's international editor, Isabel Oakeshott, somebody that I don't hesitate to say is a bit of an expert on the COVID inquiry. Isabel, we've talked about this an awful lot. I'm just seeing a story that's come out in the Times tonight saying experts have been apparently unable to retrieve communications from the first half of 2020 from that old-fashioned view of WhatsApp.
Oh, well, that's disappointing. I mean, they should have asked me. I could have given them a great deal of them. I mean, it does seem a bit odd that no one has thought to just ask me for these things since I've got them. So does the Telegraph.
Yes.
But anyway, what they would see in those communications is a man who's quite tortured in a way over how to respond to the pandemic, as well, you know, in fairness, he might be. And you see someone who's wrestling with doing something that they instinctively really don't like doing. Boris Johnson is not a man who particularly likes the state bossing people around. You know, this is somebody people might remember years ago when Jamie Oliver had his big drive on healthy eating in schools. Boris Johnson suggested that parents might do well to stick fatty kind of pies through the railings of the playground in rebellion at being told what their children should and shouldn't eat. So it was very much against his sort of ideology to announce lockdowns. And yet he really was up against the might of pretty much everybody around him, with a slight exception of Rishi Sunak, the then Chancellor. And then, of course, Boris himself got COVID and was very, very dangerously ill. And it became even more difficult for him to push back against all those around him who kept on saying we needed more and more lockdowns, because after all, he had nearly died of the virus himself. So it will be super interesting to hear whether he's got any regrets about the decisions that he made, and whether he accepts that actually it might have been better to avoid repeated lockdowns. I'm not sort of holding my breath on that, but it'd be interesting to see whether we get any hint of it.
Well, thus far, we've had various former cabinet ministers painting him as either somebody who was in charge or somebody who wasn't in charge. The scientists have more or less said that he didn't understand the science, and despite them trying to explain it to him, he didn't get it. So he's been sort of painted in that rather cartoony sort of way that Boris Johnson is often portrayed, as a bit of a buffoon. And presumably the questioning will follow down that road tomorrow, won't it?
Well, I mean, given the track record of those who are conducting the inquiry, I'm afraid it probably will be. There's an awful lot of grandstanding there. Sometimes I'm afraid it feels as if the inquiry lawyers, the inquiry QCs, are kind of doing this for social media clips. I mean, I'm sure they take their duties very seriously, but the line of questioning often seems tremendously trivial and petty and designed to produce a headline, when what we really want to do is, in a very accelerated fashion, get to the heart of whether things could be learned. And, you know, I've long been going on about the fatal flaw in this whole process. First of all, the ridiculous sort of unlimited budget it has. Secondly, the extent to which it's geared around the victims and the bereaved, who, of course, our hearts go out to them, but the inquiry is not the place for a mass counselling session. And thirdly, and most importantly, the whole damn thing doesn't have a deadline. And without a deadline, it will go on forever.
Yeah, it will. And I'm reminded of how ridiculous it all was by what's going on now. Piers Morgan does his show tonight from his house because he's got COVID. Loads of people who work here have got COVID. Loads of people are getting COVID. And nobody's running off and locking themselves away for the rest of their lives and wearing a mask.
Start giving them ideas.
Well, I'm not very happy to hear that the whole of Talk Towers is riddled with COVID.
Well, that's not what I'm saying. Do not take my words out of context, please.
I will be straight in the studio tomorrow, and I will be taking my chances, as I did throughout the pandemic. Look, life can go on, can't it? And I think, as I've said many times, we can all forgive and understand and perhaps agree with the early stages of lockdown when the government didn't know what they were dealing with. For me, at the heart of this is whether it was justifiable, sensible, and with the glorious benefit of hindsight, was it wise to keep on subjecting the nation to lockdowns? Was that, on balance, a good or a bad thing? And I don't think we're going to get those answers
I
from
don't
the
think
COVID
so. But luckily,
inquiry.
Peter Hitchens is here with me from Daily Mail, and he's going to answer that one in a minute for you, I'm sure. He just said don't give them any ideas. But what would happen, for example, Isabel, if the committee, the COVID inquiry committee, came to you and said, "Can you give us all Boris Johnson's WhatsApps?" Would you hand them over?
Well, I think I would have to. I mean, the whole point of me having these WhatsApps in the first place was in the overwhelming national interest. It's in the overwhelming national interest that people should know what was being said. And actually, some of the most illuminating things that have come out of the COVID inquiry, and there haven't been very many, have actually come from WhatsApp correspondence, because I didn't have anywhere near all of it. I just had Matt Hancock's correspondence, his private exchanges with most of the government, his cabinet colleagues and all the key players in the pandemic. But lots has come out from other WhatsApps, and I don't think if those WhatsApps from Matt Hancock's project hadn't come to light, we would have been privy to all the rest of it. But I don't think, well, look, if they come to me and ask for it, well, we'll have to make that decision, but I can't see a reason to withhold it.
No, indeed. Well, we'll look forward to that. Isabel, thank you very much indeed.